Next up is Joe Geneva, the former U.S. Attorney, former independent counsel, former special counsel for Congress. So there's not a hat you hadn't worn that isn't applicable to this situation. So we appreciate whatever you're able to share with the American people today.
Well, I want to focus on the scandal within the scandal. And by that I mean what James Comey has done to the FBI. This is a sad and terrible moment in American history of law enforcement. Never before has there been such a public and sad display of poor judgment and, I must say, political influence in a decision as to whether or not to recommend charges. I do not believe at this point that the Director Comey is fit to continue in office. I believe that a resolution of no confidence in him should be filed in the Senate. I believe that his recent testimonies on Capitol Hill are rife with the type of arrogance and obfuscation that should disqualify anyone with the kind of power that the FBI director has from continuing in office. I believe that he has violated his oath as the director of the FBI because after looking at the entire record that he has made public, and it is not the entire record, it is very clear that from the moment he took control of this investigation, he decided that he was not going to recommend the prosecution of the first female nominee of a major party for President of the United States. The FBI director made a political decision. He did not make a law enforcement decision. And every step that he took in conducting this investigation, quote unquote, which it was not, shows you categorically that it was not a legitimate investigation. And I say that with sadness. You recounted the number of federal offices that I've held that involve investigation. I consider, James Comey said that no reasonable prosecutor would bring the case that they had come up with based on the facts. That is utter nonsense. His news conference, and it wasn't a news conference because he didn't answer any questions, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt and call it his news, where he explained all, not all, but most of the details of her transgressions, and then concluded, to the amazement of most of the FBI agents in that building and almost all of the former FBI agents in the United States, that there was no crime because there was no intent, was absolutely ludicrous. Not only was his news conference sophomoric in its content and in its delivery, but he followed it up later on September the 7th with an email to his staff after he took tremendous criticism for his explanation. I'm going to read a couple of sentences from that memo to the FBI staff, and I will assure you it is not a memo that J. Edgar Hoover or any other former FBI director would have written. It is embarrassment piled upon embarrassment. It has a Valley Boy quality to it that is so sad to hear an FBI director talk this way. Now, it is evident to me that what Mr. Comey should have done at the beginning of this investigation was impanel a grand jury. He did not do that. When you want to investigate crimes involving national security information, classified information, you don't do interviews. You issue subpoenas to witnesses, third parties for documents. You make people come into court and fight them in front of a federal judge, and you worry about attorney-client privilege and all that, and you work that out. Director Comey didn't do that. Now, why did he not do that? He didn't do it because he didn't want to investigate it. He wanted to conclude this investigation before the election. And the only thing he could do to conclude it was to find that she did not commit a crime, Mrs. Clinton. That conclusion, again, by anyone who's looked at this evidence, who's a reasonable prosecutor, is absolutely ludicrous. There were multiple crimes here committed by her. There were certainly crimes committed by lawyers involved in the case, by employees of the Clinton apparatus, the destruction of evidence, the manner in which witnesses were handled. One lawyer representing 3 or 4 witnesses. The Justice Department never permits that, but Comey and the Attorney General allowed it. Deletion of emails after they were subpoenaed by Congress. Destruction of evidence by lawyers, which Mr. Comey says he found no criminal intent in that. I must say, after watching Director Comey testify and give his news conference, one has the sense of a Russian village. This is like a Potemkin village. This was a fake investigation. Everybody knows it. I flew to Los Angeles at the beginning of this week with a former head of counterintelligence for the FBI. And we chatted throughout the flight about this. And he bemoaned the performance of the FBI director. And he said the thing that hurt the most was how embarrassed the employees were. That's why he sent out this silly memo on September the 7th, where he literally almost laughs at them for being concerned and asks them not to do that. I think what also is very, very serious about this from a public policy standpoint and from good government standpoint, he created a double standard of justice at the highest levels of government. There are now two systems of justice for people with classified information clearances. The big shots get a pass, the little people go to prison. It is as simple as that. It is tawdry, it is disgusting, it is flagrantly violative of his oath. And when you destroy the concept of the fair administration of justice, you know what the American people do? They get worried. They lose confidence. And the worst thing for this country is for the American people not to trust the FBI. And they don't right now. And there's a reason for it. It's because James Comey heads the FBI. He should be gone. Now, he's not going to go. He's not going to resign. Congress is not going to impeach him. But what they should do, what Congress should do, is they should pass a resolution of no confidence. They should tell him that his news conference, his memo to his employees, his conclusion, his so-called investigation are not the kind of things that they expect from a real FBI director. I must tell you that I think that his performance is almost as brazen in its cleverness as Hillary Clinton's brazenness in her destruction of the emails. It is fascinating that the two of them seem to be traveling in a parallel way together, hand in hand through the meadow. If you sit back and talk to FBI agents around the country about this investigation and the way he has explained it and described it, I've heard people call him, the FBI agents in the big building in Washington call him the Cardinal. One of them said to me the other day that Mr. Comey heard that there was a vacancy in the Holy Trinity and he's applied. He has a sense of himself that is so pompous and arrogant, and you see it. You know, he's a man of great height, and he's a very impressive fellow, and he knows it. And he uses it as a tool, and he uses it in Congress. His pretense yesterday and at the other hearings that he was deeply offended that anyone would question the integrity of his investigation. You'd have to be a loon not to question the integrity of his investigation. It's so blatantly obvious that this was like a cheap prize fight, and he took a dive. I mean, this is the 1930s movie, you know, where a bunch of hoods pay some guys off and a guy takes a dive. That's what this was. This was a law enforcement dive. And for him to sit there and pretend to members of Congress that he was offended by having the conduct of him and his agency called weaselly is quite sad. I think everyone knows what he did. He took a pass, he took a dive, and I think what he has done to the agency is what matters to me. I don't care about James Comey. I mean, he will go. His term, he has 6 more years or whatever, and good riddance to him when it's over. But the truth is this. He has done damage that is incalculable and irreparable at this point to the FBI, because now what will people think of the next classified information case when there was no grand jury in this case, not a single subpoena was issued, and he grants immunity to a number of people who never should have been granted immunity. They should have been thrown in front of a grand jury, forced to take the fifth, and then continue the investigation. The absence of a grand jury is the answer to every one of his questions of his critics. He says, well, what did you expect me to do? Well, Mr. Director, we expected regular order. We call that regular order. When you have a serious criminal violation, and there is no doubt that when Mrs. Clinton, he says there was no intent, and you're absolutely right, Chris, intent was not required under this statute. It's gross negligence. However, there are other parts of that statute that require intent that could have been met by a legitimate investigation. And if the director of the FBI thinks that putting a private server in a private home in Chappaqua, New York, with no encryption, with multiple devices working off it with or not encrypted, is not a violation of 793, that's another reason he should resign. It is, to me, this is one of the grossest miscarriages of justice. All of these people sitting around in the military who have lost their clearances, lost their jobs, been prosecuted. That poor submarine guy who took a photograph which he never sent to his family. The guy was prosecuted and was convicted and has a year in the brig. How can Comey go to sleep at night knowing about that kid? I must say, I find Comey's presence still in the directorship at the FBI an insult to everybody in federal law enforcement. And I think he should go, and I think he's violated his oath, and I think that Congress should at least do something to manifest their outrage at this clearly political decision he made. And, you know, I think the fact that he's offended shows that he knows how awful his performance was as a federal law enforcement official. And all you have to do is talk to people like James Kallstrom in New York, the great assistant director, who called this a farce, because that's what it is. This investigation was a farce, and Comey knows it. Thank you, Tom.